I slipped into a room with my colleague at office party. The look on my husband's face ended it all. You might want to get comfortable, because this isn't something I can rush through. If I'm going to explain how one night at an office party detonated everything I thought I had under control, I need to start at the beginning. I wish I could say it's just some wild story that happened to a friend of a friend, but no, this is mine. And it's one of those moments you replay at 3 a.m., not because you don't know where it went wrong, but because you do. Me and my colleague had already let things drift into dangerous territory months before, while we all moved in the same circles like nothing was out of place. A few months ago, my husband and I moved to a new city. We didn't know anyone, we had no friends, no family, no familiar places to fall back on. One weekend, a neighbor invited us to a small get-together. That's where we met Evans. He was easy to talk to, the kind of person who could slot into any conversation, and the three of us ended up spending most of the night together. It felt natural in a way you don't expect with strangers. We swapped numbers, started meeting for drinks or dinner, and before long, it was just understood that if one of us made plans, the other two were probably coming along. I didn't realize he and I worked for the same company until my first day at my new job, when I walked in and saw him leaning against the reception desk, smiling like he'd been waiting for me to notice. I was honestly caught off guard when I saw him there. Up until that moment, me, him, and my husband had talked about just about everything except work, so realizing we shared an employer was a surprise. He told me later he'd figured it out earlier that morning when he saw my name on the new hire list and figured it had to be me. By the time I showed up, he'd already been picturing my reaction. Since we'd met outside of work, the usual stiffness that comes with new colleagues wasn't there. We already had an easy rhythm, knew each other's sense of humor, and slipping into that at the office felt almost too natural. It turned out we were even in the same department. I went home that evening and told my husband, half amused and half relieved. He actually seemed a little excited about it. Since the three of us already got along, he figured it would make my first weeks easier, because there will be no awkward lunches alone, no feeling like an outsider in a new place. He even joked that Evan could show me the ropes and keep an eye out for me. At the time, it felt like a good thing. Working together every day created openings that hadn't been there before. A last-minute client brief would have us in the same conference room after everyone else had gone home, both of us hunched over the same laptop, trading ideas in low voices. He'd drop by my desk under the pretense of asking about a report, but end up staying until someone else walked past. I started noticing he'd make sure his coffee breaks with mine coincided, even if it meant leaving a half-written email behind. Once, when the office printer jammed, we ended up on the floor together trying to fix it, laughing quietly so we wouldn't draw attention. Outside the office, it shifted too, a text about a new spot to grab lunch, an offer to swing by if I needed an extra hand with groceries. It was still on the right side of the line, but every interaction felt like we were edging closer to something we hadn't named out loud. Anyways, a couple of months after I started working at the office, our neighbor decided to throw a big party for his wife's birthday, and he invited everyone in the neighborhood, including me, my husband, and Evans. It was one of those warm, lively evenings where you could feel the excitement in the air, and we were all looking forward to it because we'd been getting to know people in the new city. My husband and I got dressed up, nothing too fancy, just nice enough to blend in, and we headed over to the neighbor's house, which was just a few doors down from ours. Evans showed up too, looking as relaxed as ever, and he gave us that easy smile of his when he saw us walk in. The house was buzzing with music and chatter, and the smell of grilled food wafted through the air, but it didn't take long to notice that things weren't exactly going as planned. The host, bless his heart, was trying his absolute best to make the party perfect for his wife, but he was terrible at planning, and it showed. There were paper plates, but no napkins, not enough chairs for everyone, and the drinks were warm because, as it turned out, he'd completely forgotten to get ice. People were starting to murmur, and you could see the panic creeping into his eyes as he realized he was dropping the ball. He made a quick announcement asking if anyone could help out, and Evans, being the guy he is, immediately raised his hand and said he'd run to the store to grab some ice. Everyone nodded, grateful, and then to my surprise, my husband piped up and offered to go get a cake because, get this, the host had also forgotten to order one. I couldn't believe it, but I laughed it off because it was such a classic mix-up, and my husband was already grabbing his keys, ready to save the day. So off they went, Evans to get the ice and my husband to track down a cake, and the rest of us kept the party going. People were dancing, the music was loud, and the birthday girl was trying to keep a smile on her face despite the chaos. I was mingling, sipping on a warm soda, but then, out of nowhere, the sky just opened up, and a massive storm rolled in. It wasn't just a little rain, it was the kind of heavy, pounding downpour that makes you feel like the world's about to wash away. The windows rattled, and you could hear the wind howling outside, and I started to get this tight knot in my stomach. I was standing by the window, watching the rain come down in sheets, and my mind was racing, worrying about whether they were okay out there. I must have looked like a wreck because the birthday girl, the host's wife, came over and put a hand on my shoulder. She could see how lost I was in my thoughts, and she gave me this gentle smile and told me not to worry, that he'd be fine. She said it with such confidence, like she knew everything would turn out okay, but here's the thing that hit me like a ton of bricks. When she said he, my mind didn't go to my husband. It went straight to Evans. I don't know why, but in that moment, all I could think about was him, out there in that storm, and whether he was safe. It wasn't until she added that my husband was a big boy who could handle himself that I snapped back to reality, and I realized she'd been talking about my husband the whole time. I forced a smile, nodded, and mumbled something about how I was sure they'd both be fine, but inside, my head was spinning. That moment was like a light bulb going off, and not in a good way. I stood there, clutching my soda, and it hit me hard. I cared about Evans, like really cared, in a way I hadn't let myself admit before. It wasn't just that he was a friend or a fun coworker. I was falling for him, and the thought scared me to death because I was married, and this wasn't supposed to happen. I tried to push it down, to focus on the party, but my eyes kept darting to the door, waiting for them to come back. When they finally did, soaked from the rain but carrying bags of ice and a slightly lopsided cake, everyone cheered, and I felt this rush of relief seeing Evans walk through the door. My husband was grinning, proud of his mission, and I hugged him, but my heart was somewhere else, and I couldn't shake it. From that night on, I couldn't look at Evans the same way. Every time he was around, whether at work or when we hung out as a group, I noticed things I hadn't before, like the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, or how he always seemed to know when I needed a break from a tough day. It was like my feelings had been hiding in plain sight, and now they were screaming at me, impossible to ignore. One day at the office, we were both working on a project, and I caught myself staring at him while he was typing, completely lost in thought. He noticed, looked up, and asked me what was wrong, his voice soft but curious. I panicked and said it was nothing, just zoning out, but my heart was pounding, and I could tell he didn't quite buy it. The feelings only got stronger after that, and it was torture because I knew I couldn't act on them, but they were there, growing like a weed I couldn't pull out. I was restless, snapping at little things, and I couldn't focus because every time I was around him, I felt like I was betraying my husband just by thinking about it. It all came to a head one evening when we were working late at the office. It was just the two of us, everyone else had gone home, and we were finishing up a presentation that was due the next day. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning, and I was so tired of pretending, so tired of carrying this weight. I couldn't take it anymore, so I just shut my laptop, looked at him, and asked what we were doing. He looked confused and said we were working, but I shook my head and said that wasn't what I meant. I told him I was talking about us, about how I couldn't possibly be the only one feeling this way, and my voice was shaking because I was terrified of what I was saying. He went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I'd made a huge mistake, but then he looked at me, and his eyes were so serious. He said he'd been feeling it too, had been for a while, but he hadn't said anything because he knew I was married, and he didn't want to mess things up. My heart was racing because hearing him say it made it real, and before I could think better of it, I told him I couldn't stop thinking about him, that I cared about him in a way I wasn't supposed to. He reached out, his hand brushing mine, and it was like the air between us caught fire. We didn't stop to talk it through or think about the consequences. We just leaned into each other, and the next thing I knew, we were kissing, right there in the empty office, with papers scattered on the desk and the fluorescent lights humming above us. It was like everything we'd been holding back came crashing out, and we got carried away, letting passion take over completely. When I got home that night, my heart was still racing from what happened with Evans in the office, and I was a mess of emotions, both thrilled and terrified. My husband was already in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, and he looked up with a smile and asked how work went. I couldn't tell him the truth, so I just said it was great, forcing a grin as I dropped my bag on the counter. He tilted his head, noticing how upbeat I was, and asked why I seemed so happy, like he was trying to figure out what had gotten into me. I shrugged and said I didn't really know. Maybe it was just a good day. And he laughed, saying he was just glad to see me in such a good mood. I felt a pang of guilt, but his smile made it easier to push it down, and we spent the rest of the evening eating dinner and chatting about nothing important, while my mind kept drifting back to Evans. The next morning, I was up and out the door earlier than usual, practically buzzing with excitement to get to work. I couldn't wait to see Evans, and it was like the air between us had changed overnight. If you thought we were close before, it was nothing compared to how things were now. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, and it wasn't just stolen glances or quick chats anymore. We were sneaking off to the restroom during lunch breaks, slipping into each other's offices after most of the staff had left for the day, and even getting bold enough to hook up in the conference room when we were working late on projects. It was reckless, but it felt like we were in our own little world, and the thrill of it made everything else fade away. People around the office started to notice how much time we spent together, and they'd tease us, calling me his work wife and him my work husband. It was all in good fun, and no one suspected anything serious because we played it off so well, laughing along with them while keeping our secret. But that high didn't last forever, and reality came crashing down one afternoon when I got an email from my boss asking me to come to his office. My stomach dropped because he didn't usually call me in out of the blue, and something about the tone of the email felt off. When I walked in, Evans was already there, sitting in one of the chairs across from the boss's desk, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. The air in the room was heavy, and I could tell something was wrong, but I had no idea how bad it was about to get. My boss didn't say anything at first, just sat there with this unreadable look on his face, and the silence was agonizing. Finally, he turned his computer monitor toward us and clicked play on a video. My heart stopped when I saw it was security footage from the conference room, and there we were, Evans and me, caught in the act, no mistaking what we were doing. I felt the blood drain from my face, and I couldn't even look at Evans because I was so mortified. Before I could process it, he clicked another video, this one showing us slipping into the restroom together, then coming out later, fixing our clothes like we thought no one would notice. My hands were shaking, and I wanted to disappear, but my boss just leaned back in his chair and said he didn't care what we did on our own time. He made it clear, though, that he wasn't going to tolerate an office scandal, especially not when we were being so careless and, in his words, downright stupid. I felt like I was going to throw up, but then he said something that caught me off guard. He wasn't going to fire us. Apparently, our productivity had actually gone up since we started sneaking around, and that was the only reason he was letting it slide. But he warned us, his voice sharp, that he better not see anything like this again, or we'd be out the door. I nodded, barely able to speak, and Evans mumbled something in agreement, and we were dismissed, just like that. Walking out of his office felt like stepping out of a pressure cooker, but my legs were shaky, and my mind was racing. I was scared, not just about almost losing my job, but about how reckless we'd been, and how close we'd come to blowing up everything. Evans didn't say much as we left, just gave me a quick glance that said he was as rattled as I was, and we went back to our desks, trying to act normal. But nothing felt normal anymore, and I couldn't shake the image of that footage or the way my boss had looked at us, like we were a problem he had to manage. As we were heading out of the office later that day, still shaken, the HR intern, this perky college kid who had no idea what had just gone down, stopped us in the hallway and handed us each a brightly colored flyer. She was all smiles, chattering about an upcoming office party, and said she hoped we'd both be there. I took the flyer, my hand still trembling, and just nodded, while Evans mumbled a thanks. And we walked away, the weight of everything still hanging over us. When I got home that evening, I was a wreck, my stomach churning from the meeting with my boss and the fear of what could have happened. I felt so sad, like I was carrying a weight I couldn't shake, and as soon as I walked through the door, my husband could tell something was off. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and he looked up and asked what was wrong, his voice soft and concerned. I didn't want to brush it off and say it was nothing because that always makes him keep asking questions, so I decided to tell him a piece of the truth, just enough to keep him from digging. I said my boss had scolded me at work for messing up, and it was totally my fault, which wasn't entirely a lie because I felt guilty for being so careless with Evans. My husband didn't hesitate. He got up, wrapped me in a big hug, and told me it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes, and I'd figure it out. His arms felt warm and safe, but my mind was still racing, and I couldn't fully lean into the comfort because I was hiding so much. While he was hugging me, he noticed something sticking out of my bag and asked what it was, reaching over to pull it out before I could stop him. It was the flyer for the office party, all bright and cheesy with balloons printed on it, and he burst out laughing, asking what kind of office still prints flyers to invite staff to a party instead of just sending a group email or text. I laughed too, mostly to cover how nervous I felt, and explained that I'd asked the same thing at work, and they told me it was some old company tradition they'd kept up for years. He scanned the flyer, his eyes lighting up when he saw that staff could bring their spouses, and he said right away that he was coming, no question about it. My heart sank because I couldn't exactly tell him no without raising suspicion, so I just nodded and said that sounded great, even though my mind was screaming about how complicated this could get with Evans there. A few days later, the office party rolled around, and it was honestly a blast, at least at first. The venue was decked out with lights and music, people were dancing, and there was this contagious energy in the air. My husband was in a great mood, chatting with everyone, and he hit it off with Evans right away. They were talking and laughing like old friends, and at one point they both started teasing me about how I bite my nails when I'm nervous, which had me laughing so hard I almost forgot the mess I was in. It felt so good to see them getting along, and for a moment I could pretend everything was normal, like I wasn't hiding this huge secret. Evans eventually wandered off to dance, moving to the music with that easy confidence of his, and my husband and I kept talking, leaning into each other at a table near the bar. He asked if Evans was always so energetic at work, and I laughed, saying he was pretty much like that all the time, always keeping things lively. A few minutes later, one of my coworkers came over, a little out of breath from dancing, and said my team leader was looking for me. I knew she meant Evans because he loved calling himself that. Even though we weren't officially a team, we just worked together so much it felt like it. My stomach did a flip, but I played it cool, told my husband I'd be right back, and followed her through the crowd. She led me to a quiet hallway away from the main party, and there was Evans, leaning against the wall with that look in his eyes that made my knees weak. He started flirting right away, saying he couldn't stop thinking about me while he was dancing, and before I knew it, he was pulling me close, his hands on my waist. We kissed, slow at first, then deeper, and he squeezed my ass, whispering that he wanted me so badly. I felt the same way, my whole body buzzing with how much I wanted him too, and if he hadn't said it first, I probably would have blurted it out myself. We couldn't wait, didn't even think about where we were, and we slipped out of the hallway, weaving through the main hall where the party was still going strong. I was careful to steer us away from where my husband was sitting, my heart pounding as I checked over my shoulder to make sure he didn't see us, but I couldn't see him. Evans led me to a small room off the main area, some kind of storage or meeting room, and as soon as we got inside, we shut the door behind us. It was dark, just a sliver of light creeping under the door, but we didn't care. Evans was on me in a second, loosening his belt with one hand while pinning me against the wall with the other. He shifted my underwear aside, and when he pushed himself inside me, I let out a loud moan, completely lost in the moment. But then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through the darkness, saying there was someone in the room, and he wanted to leave before we went any further. My heart stopped because we hadn't even checked if we were alone, hadn't thought anyone could be in there with us. The person scrambled toward the door, and when he yanked it open, light from the hallway flooded in, and I saw his face. It was my husband. He saw me, pinned against the wall, and Evans, still inside me, and the look on his face was like nothing I'd ever seen before, a mix of shock and betrayal that hit me like a punch. He didn't say a word, he just turned and slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing in my ears. Evans was still there, frozen inside me, but I pushed him away to remove him. My hands were shaking as I tried to fix my clothes, and I ran after my husband, my mind racing with panic. I caught sight of him storming through the main hall, his face set like stone, and I called out, begging him to stop, but he didn't even look back. He got to the parking lot, jumped into his car, and peeled out, leaving me standing there, and my heart breaking as the taillights disappeared into the night. I just immediately found a way home, and when I got there, my husband didn't even let me say a word to him. Everything I said, he shut it down immediately. He has refused to listen to me or talk to me. He gives nothing but silence. Now he has frozen our bank accounts, and the joint card stopped working. I called the bank, and they said the accounts were under review. My name had been taken off every property we owned. I don't even know how he did it so fast. He must have been planning this for weeks. Maybe he caught on something and refused to say a word. I feel so scared right now. I don't know what to do. I don't want him to end our marriage. I can't bear him erasing me from his life because it seems that way now.
Update. Say that.
Evans and I have been trying to stay away from each other, and I've been dealing with my husband's silence for weeks. I know he's hurt and feels betrayed, especially since the three of us used to hang out together. I'm sorry, and I wish he'd just give me a chance to explain. Last week, I had a big presentation for the senior management team. I'd spent days preparing my slides. When I connected my laptop to the projector and clicked play, it wasn't my presentation, it was a sex video of me and Evans. The room went dead quiet. My boss told me to stop it right now, but it was too late. Everyone had seen enough. I didn't need to think twice. This had my husband written all over it, but I don't know how he got the video. By the end of the day, HR called both of us in separately. They said it was gross misconduct and a breach of company policy. I was fired on the spot. Evans was too. When I got home, my clothes and personal things were in boxes outside the front door. The locks had been changed. On top was an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a stamped copy of the divorce papers he'd already filed. Evans hasn't spoken to me since. He lost his job, and I think he blames me. I'm depressed, I can't sleep, and I honestly don't know what to do anymore. I'm spiraling, and I hope this doesn't be the end of me.